Hey everybody, Ben here for the Ben Podcast, and welcome to the Bonehead Tabletop Fantasy channel, where we cover all things fantasy wargaming. Now, we figured that for our first video, what we'd do is actually look at the best and brightest tabletop fantasy games that are live right now, that are being played right now, that are getting releases right now. So if you are interested in fantasy wargaming, we figured we put together the top list of the things you can get into right now, and one little one that I think you need to keep your eye on. As an edit, before we go any further into this list, I just want to flag War Machine isn't going to be on here. When it comes to that, we made a choice. Is it fantasy? Is it sci-fi? I think it kind of goes after the 40k market, which kind of fits in with the Dreadnought and the guns thing. So we put it in with the sci-fi crew. So you're not going to see War Machine on this list here, but spoiler alert, you're going to see it on the top sci-fi games of 2025 over on the Tabletop Sci-Fi channel. So if you want to watch that and you want to see that and you want to follow that channel, the link is down below. Otherwise, it's fantasy time. All right, let's start off big and bright. And the returning chosen one is Warhammer The Old World. So if you are a war gamer, if you like fantasy, then The Old World is probably something you know about, right? It's not the OG fantasy game, but it is probably the game that was the biggest and the brightest and spawned so much of fantasy wargaming. And that is Warhammer Fantasy Battle. Specifically editions 1 through 7, and then you sort of saw a decline in 7th edition, and then a real strong decline in 8th edition, and then it died. Games Workshop killed it off completely, and that was it for 10 years. And then they brought it back in the form of The Old World. So when The Old World returned last year, it brought with them a bunch of models from around the same era. So when you talk about The Old World, they are getting current releases, but the majority of the models that Games Workshop produced for The Old World are the models from back in 6th, 7th, 8th editions, and sometimes even older. That means some of these models are over 25 years old. Some of them, however, are not. So they are releasing new models for this game. They're mixed in with very old models for this game, but they do get releases. So what we got here, we got Tomb Kings of Khemri, which are the undead from the desert, and a lot of these models are the same models that I would have bought as a child. But man, that hits the nostalgia really, really, really hard. You've got Bretonia as well. There's a whole bunch of different races that will absolutely harken back to fantasy gaming in the 90s and 2000s. And I guess that's one thing to pull out as a bit of a flag, is this game is high in nostalgia. It's very playable. They've done a very good job of putting together a very good rule set. It plays exactly as you'd expect it to. Now, when it comes to fantasy wargaming, not a lot of them are kind of cheap options, but The Old World is potentially one of the most expensive ones to get into. You need the biggest armies, you need the biggest boards, and you need the biggest time wallet to be able to play it. But there are a few games out there that reward you, I think, in quite so much depth and quite so much continued joy as The Old World is at the moment. And if you look at the Games Workshop website on the Warhammer community, you can see that the release this week from Games Workshop is more brand new stuff for The Old World in the form of a brand new army, Cathay. So I mean, it would be absolutely ridiculous to not touch on The Old World on this list, because it is probably the biggest and the brightest in the way of fantasy wargaming at the moment, which I think dovetails us very nicely into the second game on this list. And when Warhammer Fantasy died, there was a whole bunch of square-based wargamers left with nothing to play. And then Ronnie and the Mantic crew stepped in and put together this game here, Kings of War. So Kings of War is a rank and flank fantasy battle game produced by Mantic. And it is an absolute doozy. And it's really interesting because Mantic came alive. Kings of War came alive with the decline of Warhammer Fantasy Battle. So everyone was like, how do I play with my ranked up wood elves? What do I do with my dwarves? Like, how do I do this now? And Mantic put together 1, 2, 3.5 different editions of Kings of War and have produced a ton of good models for it as well. So Kings of War has been around a while, and there's kind of one big defining trait, which is a lot of this is multi-based. And when I say multi-based, I mean you got a base and you put multiple models on it. Now, it's completely optional, to do that. You can absolutely use a movement tray with all your models on it, but that's kind of the charm about Kings of War, is that it is a multi-based thing. It's something different. Each of your units can be a little diorama, which is really cool. And it's also, for the most part, models agnostic, like miniature agnostic. When you come to play Kings of War, as long as you're using models that kind of look what you need to be using, you're not going to get kicked out. No one's going to SWAT you. No one's going to send police to your house. People are going to go, that's cool. Where are they from? It's a very, very cool environment. And spoiler alert, as you could see in my first test base there, I'm diving into Kings of War a bit for this channel because I think this game is worth exploring and worth playing. Now, there is a ton of forces available. The rules are online. You can get the free PDF, and if you've got a Mantic Companion subscription, you've got all access to all the rules for all their games and army builders as well. So it's actually pretty well positioned. They've got a lot of models on there. Some of them are not as great as others, some of their older sculpts, but I mean, we just looked at the old world where they're using models from 25 years ago, so actually in a very similar vein. One thing that's very cool about Kings of War that we're also going to be looking in is they've got this little version. So they've got Kings of War Champions. Now, Kings of War, you got full-on armies. The old world, you got full-on armies, right? But Kings of War Champions is smaller cuts of that full-on army. So if you kind of have a look at this starter set here, which is a pretty good approximation of 2 forces. Generally speaking, for Kings of War Champions, you've got 3 units and a hero. So you can see here, you've got the Forces of the Abyss, demons. You've got 1 big snake dude. You've got a ogre demon unit, a soldier demon unit, and a hero demon unit. And for the Panathor guys, for the Basilians, I believe they're called, you've got a hero unit, you've got a spearman unit, you've got an archer unit, and you've got a unit of cavalry. And you can kind of see the cool options here of like building a unit as part of that single base. I think it's really interesting, and that's why I'm diving into it for the channel, because I think this is something really interesting. And the cool thing they've done with Kings of War Champions is its own mini game. So it's basically the same rules as Kings of War, but they've introduced some really cool fast play addendums so that you've got a force. Now, Kings of War, you've got loads of army builders and loads of rosters. You can build whatever you want. But in the Kings of War Champions subset, each of these boxes is just, that's it. You don't, they're equal pointed because they've got special rules. It's a really cool thing, I think, that Mantic have done to just kind of aid people into jumping into Kings of War, and particularly jumping into rank and flank fantasy. Because let me tell you, if you're starting out with jumping into Kings of War or jumping into the old world, it's a long way to go. So the fact they've got this as the first stepping stone, I think is superb. Next on the list is a company that does many things, and this is one-page rules. And when it comes to fantasy wargaming, they've got 4 games you should be aware of. The first is Age of Fantasy, which is basically round-based fantasy. It's fantasy in skirmish formation, so it's not necessarily square-based, although you can use whatever models based however you want. That's the beautiful thing about one-page rules. It is utterly miniatures agnostic, but they also make a flipping ton of fantastic STL models, and they're producing some physical stuff at the moment, which means this is going to become a very mainstream game. This is going to start getting into your local clubs and your local game shops, and this is 100% a game to watch out for. So Age of Fantasy, it would be lovely to kind of show a couple of pictures of what the game looks like, but we'll use this because this is the starter set here. You've got a bunch of models, and they are in units of 5 or 10 for your infantry, 3 to 6 for your ogre-sized units, 3 to 10 of your cavalry units. It's a really well put game that looks a lot like Age of Sigmar, which we'll come to in a minute. So it's not your rank and flank, it's a little bit loosey-goosey. It's like 40k, but fantasy world. And the rules are exquisite. We've played this game as a group. We played a lot of this game as a group, and I really love it. And not only do they have rules for full-on battles with Age of Fantasy, they've also got Age of Fantasy Skirmish, which is such a good way to get your models onto the pitch in a short, quick way to play a short, quick game. I actually love Skirmish, I think, more than any of the other things. They've also got Regiments, so if you want to play square-based rank and flank, you can do it with their rule set. And you've got Quest, which is a solo co-op RPG light, all in the same world. all with very similar rules. It's a really well done ecosystem. Now, when it comes to one-page rules, it would be ridiculous for me to move on without touching on this, which is Army Forge, is their integral and I believe utterly free to use army builder. So what have we looked at? We've just looked at my Chaos Dwarves. So let's go here. They've got Havoc Dwarves. Let's click Havoc Dwarves. Let's create a list. Let's choose a points limit. And then let's go through and add a unit. Let's add one of those and let's choose some bits and bobs to go for it. And then it will populate you some army cards. So when it comes to one-page rules, they are doing everything. They are doing great models and great rules. And I just think this is the most fun system that's out there at the moment. So when we talk about one-page rules, I said it looked a little bit like Age of Sigmar. And we haven't touched on Age of Sigmar yet, but we probably should. So if you see tournaments of fantasy games, Old World is going to be up there, Kings of War is going to be up there, and Age of Sigmar is absolutely going to be up there. I think it's probably the most popular tournament fantasy game, although I think Kings of War and Old World are not far behind, judging from our experiences at tournament halls and stuff like that. So Age of Sigmar, this is what happened to Warhammer Fantasy Battles once it was absolutely slaughtered by Games Workshop. Games Workshop said, no, bye-bye, and it got removed, and then they introduced some fast play rules. Everything got rebased from square bases onto round bases, and they produced Age of Sigmar. Now, this has got a different vibe to it. So let's click here. It is set in a bunch of planets, so it's kind of fantasy sci-fi in a lot of ways. There's a lot of guns, there's a lot of flying boat ships and stuff like this, but at its core it is a fantasy game that's just been juiced up with some alternate fantasy spec. The Old World, Kings of War, one-page rules, there's some special bits in there, but it's kind of your classic fantasy, your classic trope fantasy. Then you've got Age of Sigmar, which is like, hey, we're going to be something a little bit different. And there's a lot of people that really like it. It's in its 4th edition at the moment. And I'd love to absolutely show you some pictures of some models and how the games work. Let's go to Games in the Mortal Realms. Be gone. All right, we're just going to the shop. Okay, that's not brilliant, but we'll go here so we can show off some of the models. Now, all fair play to Games Workshop. Some of the best models that they're making at the moment are for Age of Sigmar, and they are just churning out armies. In fact, we've got Chaos Dwarves returning to Warhammer soon. Not the Old World, sadly, but they have just been spoiled for Age of Sigmar. So you are getting constant new releases, constant new books, constant expansions, and like we said, when it comes to models in the fantasy space, there's a lot of great stuff out there, but really Age of Sigmar do physical models better than almost anybody else. Now, when it comes to the game, I'm not a huge fan. It's weird. It's a mixture of both simple and complicated, and I can totally see why a lot of people like it. I'm interested to try it out again at some point, and to be fair, when it comes to the fact that we've got the Chaos Dwarves, I am tempted to dabble with it, but I've tried it a couple of times and it's not my jam. There's a lot of special rules for everything you kind of got to consider, which kind of means it's the kind of game you play but you only play but as you can see, they've got some very cool models coming soon for Chaos Dwarves in this space, including the gigantic steam demon bull. It's very cool. So yeah, I think some of the best models in fantasy are in Age of Sigmar. Although, if you're looking for nice models, really nice models, if you're looking for models that you look at and other people see and go, ooh, what is this? Then let me introduce you to a little game called Warcrow. Now, you will have heard of Corvus Belli if you have been around wargaming for a while. They used to do 15mm Romans. Then they moved on to a little game called Infinity, which has to be one of the best sci-fi games kicking around. And they thought, you know what's better than sci-fi? Fantasy. And they have been able to produce what I think are some of the absolute best fantasy models that we've seen produced for any game in a while. They are very unique, they are very detailed, they are very stylish, and let's put it, their media team is just phenomenal with the way they process the pictures of the models, the painting of the models, the scenery. this is the most umptious game I think I've seen in a long time. Now, there's some interesting things about Warcrow. They've got some fancy dice, and it's a new and fledgling game. I think they've just about to drop their 5th faction. So you kind of got knights, you kind of got orcs, you kind of got elves, you kind of got dwarves, and then you've got, is that dwarves? I'm sure there's dwarves. And then you've got, maybe that's dwarves. Then you've got the demons that are just showing up at the moment. And this is a fledgling game system, but I am super intrigued by it. It is kind of new to wargaming, and I've watched a few of playthroughs. I think Guerrilla Miniatures Games has done one, on Tabletop have done one, and I am pretty intrigued. And you know, the starter set is on my do we get it for the channel list, because actually this game looks super promising. And having played Infinity a ton, having enjoyed those models a ton, and just looking at the way they put this together, I am thoroughly intrigued. But what if you like your war games a little bit bigger? Now, there is Parabellum Games. They make Conquest, and we continue the stream into non-standard fantasy, but incredibly gorgeous models here. So Conquest is what, a 38mm scale game. So where you've got your kind of standard Chaos Dwarves or whatever that are this big, the Conquest guys are basically 50% bigger, which means that they are chunky boys with bigger bases. It's a really interesting thing. They've gone and done that. I don't want to say just to be different, but I think what it does is it means you can kind of maximize how the game looks from a distance, which is very cool. Now, my friend Ben, you'll know him from the Bonehead podcast. He is a massive fan of this game. Oh dear, the website's not a massive fan of itself, but it's hard not to be. There's a lot of unique mechanics in this one. The units have got multi-based, but they're individually based inside them, so you kind of use them as units of 4, and it makes it a lot easier to go. There is a card system that you use to activate your units, which is similar in theory to kind of like how bolt action and stuff works. So you kind of, what activates next is going to be random, and you've got some special powers that you can use in that. And when it comes to actually having the amount of units on the tabletop, it is a little bit lighter than some of the other games, and I believe it plays in a smaller space. So instead of like the 6x4 that you need for Kings of War and the Old World and Age of Sigmar, although it might be 5x4 now, you can play on, I think, a 4x4 area for a full game of Conquest. They've gone hard with some alternate sculpts, and because they are a larger scale, it means that you've got more detail, and it just really, thank you very much, you can absolutely send me notifications this game, because it means they can go hard on making some really unique sculpts. Now, because they're bigger, they are more expensive, but they have really pulled it out. And look at the detail on some of these models. This is why Brushdive loves this game so much, is because all of the sculpts are a bit of a painter's dream. Now, they are bigger scale than other fantasy games, so there's no chance of you using them across purposes. So if you've got Kings of War, you can kind of flex it into the Old World. If you've got Age of Sigmar, you can absolutely positively play one-page rules. But when it comes to this game, because it's its own unique scale, it makes it harder to use. But I think this is another one of those games that if you want to play a game, you play this game, and I don't think you will look back. The only downside about this game is it's one of those ones where rolling lower is better, and I find that challenging. All right, we've got a few little games to mention now that I could not put on this list, and one of them is Moonstone. So this is kind of unique fantasy skirmish with some of the most fun and vibrant sculpts you will ever see from any miniatures ever. In fact, any one of these models could be a display piece, but it actually comes with a really interesting game. So there's cards, there's fancy dice, there's little D4 that you drop from the sky to kind of set the board. But when it comes to having any kind of models, Moonstone, which basically you've got a team of 6 guys per side, all of the sculpts, every single unit is a character. There's no vanilla guys. Everybody has a name. Everyone has their own kind of, let's go to the goblins because they're pretty entertaining. Every single, like we've got a goblin riding a little dog here. You've got a little knight. You've got a little troll man. Every single one of these is its own character, and they just keep pumping out fantastic sculpts. Ian and Craig, who you'll know from the main channel, they have been painting some of these models recently, and I mean, they are just outrageously nice. Let's see, giants and trolls, they've got all kinds of brilliant sculpts. So Moonstone is a really interesting take on skirmish, which goes into the kind of like, Ian's painted this model very recently. It goes into the world of, this is a game of 6 fantasy characters against your 6 fantasy characters, and it's going to have some wibbly wobbly cardy bits going along with it. So it's not your big trope fantasy war game, but it is fantasy, it is a war game, and it is really very special. And talking of classic fantasy war game, we've got another game, and it's called Classic Fantasy Battle. So this is my one to watch. Now, a long time ago, there was a game called Warmaster, which was produced by Games Workshop, which was 10 mil fantasy. And I remember it being fantastic, but it was a long time ago, so it probably wasn't as good as I remember. But damn, that was such a cool vibe. Big armies of fantasy battle, big armies of small dudes. It looked like an epic battle with some maneuver and dragons and war machines, and it was fantastic. Now, Warmaster's gone a long time now from Games Workshop. It died even before Warhammer Fantasy Battle did, but 10 mil stuff has been floating around. Primarily kind of like your metal sculpts and STLs for the last few years. Now, Wargames Atlantic are working on something called Classic Fantasy Battles. Mass battle on a grand scale. Classic Fantasy Battles is a new game system written by Andy Hobday, featuring mass battles in the classic fantasy setting. So if you are a fantasy gamer, if you like classic fantasy and you like small scale stuff, then this is one to keep an eye on. And they've done a really good job of presenting some of the models here. Oh, here we go. Let's zoomy. There we go. So you can see this is one box of dwarves, and tell me that doesn't tickle your retro fantasy wargaming thing. You've got a box of dwarves here. You've got crossbows, you've got axes, you've got spears, you've got dudes riding rams and things. They've got an orc box out now, and there's an undead box that I think is just coming out as well. And it just smacks of old school fantasy gaming in so much way. Now, there's a game coming out for it in Q4 2025, which I believe starts in a couple of months' time. So hopefully, come along by Christmas, there will be a current and live 10 mil fantasy game back in our lives. And the last game I'm going to mention on this list is having a semi-retirement, and this is something very special and a game I've played quite a lot of and really enjoy. Now, this is Mantic Armada. Now, they've not released any physical models for a while, but in the Mantic Vault, which is their STL subscription, they've dropped a couple of new fleets in the last few months. We've got the demons, they've landed, and the undead fleet is actually coming out right now. In fact, I think I've got some undead ships on my printer waiting to be cleaned right now. So even though Armada may not be everywhere in the shops, Mantic are continuing to add fleets and add stuff to it. And by the way, it is the only place you are going to get fantasy naval wargaming at the moment. So in the olden times, Games Workshop produced a game called Man of War back in 1993, and it was what if elves and dwarves from Warhammer Fantasy Battle got on boats and tried to kill each other. And that sparked something beautiful in all of us. And then it went away, and Mantic were like, well, you know what, guys? We've got elves, we've got dwarves, let's make some boats. And Mantic put together some of the most beautiful models I have seen for wargaming. Fantasy ships floating around on the seas, cannons and dragons and undead and wizards, and it is everything that you want it to be. There's a ton of different fleets. You've got the Basilians, which are the kind of like premium humans of this world. You've got orcs, which are orcs. You've got Empire of Dust, which are your tomb kings. You've got dwarves, who are dwarves. You've got elves, who are elves. You've got Twilight Kin, who are what the Dark Elves became in this thing. They're kind of like demonic elves. It's really cool. They've got like Drow meets the Never Never. Very cool vibes. Then you've got the Salamanders, which are the Lizardmen. Then you've got the Northern Alliance, which are your Norse. Then you've got the Trident Realm, which are just underwater dudes who in this game just swim around on the back of, yeah, big whales and have big crabs and stuff. It is absolutely nonsense. They've got the Abyssal Dwarfs as well, who are kind of my boys at the moment. And they've dropped the Demon Fleet and the Undead Fleet as STLs only, which means you get a ton of stuff to play with when it comes to actually using this game. I've zoomed in significantly far too much. Now, it is a low threshold game to get into, and it is a pretty straightforward game. And again, if you've got the Mantic Companion app, you've got all the rules and all the ability to build your army lists otherwise. And spoiler alert, I really want to feature this on the channel because it plugs in so nicely. You've got the chance here. And as a wargamer, I'm sure you've thought about this. What if my ships could fight? And then based on the naval battle or the spaceship battle, that then leads into a skirmish game, which then leads into a war game. Well, actually, Mantic, you've got Armada, you've got Kings of War, and you've got Kings of War Champion. So I feel like there's a campaign there somewhere. All right, so that is not an exhaustive list of all the fantasy games that are going on at the moment, and are certainly not an exhaustive list of all the games that you might want to play. Wartime is obviously missing from this, as are a bunch of cool dungeon crawlers. But these are the games I've got my eye on for 2025. I think these are the games that have got things coming out for, new editions brewing up, and are the ones that I think you can see being played the most. But by all means, drop a comment below if there's something that I've not hit, something that you're excited by, and something that you want to see us cover and potentially play on this channel. But for now, I'm going to wrap up. Thank you very much for joining us. We'll be back soon with more wargaming content. Happy gaming. Thanks very much for watching. We really appreciate your support. If you want to support the channel even further, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment below, or come and join us on Patreon or YouTube members for bonus content and early access to everything we do on all the channels on the Bonehead Network, because more wargaming is more better. Anyway, thanks so much for joining us. Happy gaming.